So tonight we're going to finish up in chapter 4, and we're going to talk about love some more. And Doug is prepared to read 1 John chapter 4, verse 7 through 1 John 5, verse 3. And in my opinion, that's the context of love. I think sometimes our English translations give us an injustice of a context. They break it sometimes at different verses than I think it should be. That's just my opinion. But I think really chapter 5 begins with faith, and that would begin in verse 4. Good Lord willing, we'll study verse 4 through the end of the chapter, the end of the book next week, and that'll be our last class together on Wednesday night. And then in 2 weeks, we'll have our congregational singing that we have before the quarter, so the next quarter. We'll do the best we can. So if you will, turn to 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, and we'll let Doug read those verses.
1 John chapter 4, starting in verse 7. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. In this, the love of God was manifested toward us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love has been perfected in us. By this we know that we abide in him, and he in us, because he has given us of his Spirit. And we have seen and testify that the Father has sent the Son as Savior of the world. Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him, and he in God. And we have known and believed the love that God has for us. God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. Verse 17. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us. If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? And this commandment we have from him, that he who loves God must love his brother also. Chapter 5, verse 1. Whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone who loves him who begot also loves him who is begotten of him. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome.
Thank you, Doug. So as we begin tonight, let's review just a little bit and think about the word love. I looked at the original language for this context, and every time that the word love is said here, it's the agape love, the most powerful love that we know. Our vocabulary and our understanding won't let us have anything over agape love. That's what God did for us when he gave his Son. That's what God did when he raised Christ from the dead, and his salvational plan with obedience is that unconditional love. Now, his love is unconditional, but salvation is conditional. There's things that we have to understand, that we have to do, we have to obey in order to do that. So in the context of agape love, unconditional, always looking for the best, verse 7 through 18 is the family of God, which is Christians, us, connecting with God. The connector is love, okay? And then down in that chapter, verses 12 through 16, we should connect with God and also should connect with each other. Love is the tie that binds, or the cord that binds. We sang that song sometime. And then verses 17 through verse 3 of chapter 5 teaches us that we should live for heaven. We should live on this earth for heaven. And if we do that, we have no choice but to love. So the question was asked of me, how do we say, I love you to someone that we're not very comfortable with? She said, not with words. Don't get ahead of me. I'm just teasing. But she's exactly right, not with words. So if we think about the agape love, I want to try to answer that question in the most practical way that we can, okay? How can we apply it today? We can apply it with some scripture. I think we can learn to love, learn that charity that's translated agape. We can learn that by what the Bible's already taught us, okay? So I have permission to tell you his name that asked me, because he asked the question, and then he did some research on it, so he kind of answered it himself. So Elon asked that question, and he very quickly came to the conclusion that we just talked about. It's only in actions, not in words. So if you will, turn over to James chapter 2. And as we study these scriptures, let's think about, how can I love you more? How can I love you more individually? And how can you love me more? And then how can you love the person sitting beside you more? How can you love the children that's in the Bible class? How can we love them more? How can we love our deacons and elders more? How can we love our preachers more? How can we love the member more? I think these scriptures will teach us that. So if I say, I love you, what does that mean to you? I love you all. What does that mean to you? It's pretty good to hear. I like to hear it. But it doesn't mean anything unless I put some shoe leather on it. Absolutely. Claude said it's a disposition, a thought process, right? So let's look at James chapter 2. James is after Hebrews. It's going the wrong way. James chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. In the context of faith without works is dead, we understand that context. We got to have some action. So verses 2, verses 15 and 16. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say to him, depart in peace, be warm and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? If we say, I love you, and never give somebody warm clothes, what have we done? Now, 1 John is the leading book of the whole New Testament that describes this word that we're talking about, this unconditional charity, agape love. 1 Corinthians 13, as y'all all know, I strongly like that chapter. I'm trying to do better. I'm really trying to do better. Well, lasagna, Donna's going to get me. But 1 Corinthians 13 has some agape love in it. But it also has some of the feel good. I like that embrace the phileo. Is that right? Is that how you would say it? It's that warm, fuzzy feeling. That's what 1 Corinthians is talking about. So, number one, we have to have action. Let's reference Ruth. What did Ruth do? In that short book, did we ever hear the words, "From Ruth, I love you"? It's not written. But did she love? Beth is affirming. Why do we know that Ruth loved? By her actions. She said, "Where you die, I'm going to die." She did. I'm sorry? She did. She put her mother-in-law first. Actions, okay? So if we know Ruth loved, but she didn't say it, how can we say "I love you" to someone that we're not very comfortable with? It has to be more than just the words. Yes, Dennis. Sure. Absolutely. Dennis said the love that we should have, the agape love, is the fulfillment, the end result, if you will. He referenced even the creation all the way to the cross through death. That was Dennis's point, was, hey, I'm going to I've got to have some actions, okay? So we've established that we have to have action to love more, right? So let's look at, let's turn over to Galatians chapter 5, and we'll begin in verse 16. We probably won't read all of them. So if you love more, and we try not to say the words "I love you," which those are very important words. They are tremendously important. You have to say that. But they're meaningless if you don't do the action. So as we study Galatians here, it's talking about the Christian liberty. It's talking about some thought processes. It's talking about attributes that we should have. And then in verse 16, "I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." The flesh is going to get us in trouble. So, verse 17, "For the flesh lust against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish," or the things that you want, correct? Skip down just a few verses and let's look at verse 22. Verses 19 through 21 is teaching a correct or an incorrect moral code. You can look at it, in the positive or the negative. The adulteress obviously is the incorrect moral code. So it has a code. Notice what verse 22. "But the fruit of the Spirit," what's the very first fruit of the Spirit? Translated, agape. Do you think it's coincidental that love is the first in this list? I don't think so either. I think it's by design. It's the same word at the end of 1 Corinthians where it says, "In these three, what's the greatest? Love." The King James translates it charity, which is agape. 1 Corinthians 13 could get you a little bit confused if you just read it on the surface, because it's translated both the feel-good, fuzzy, and the unconditional love. But at the end, where it talks about love being the greatest, is unconditional, the charity, putting someone above yourself. That's the greatest, okay? So as we learn to put more action, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. So how do we increase our actions? When God wrote this letter to the Galatians and he used Paul's pen, he said love, peace, goodness, gentleness, kindness, long-suffering. How do you love more? I submit to you, you put on the fruits of the Spirit. Because if you put them on, it's like Clyde and I have a vest on. We put it on. That's what happens when you put the fruits of the Spirit on. You put the love on. It encompasses you, right? So if we love to that degree, there's not anything else we can do. There's not room, right? Any comments? Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes. Try to summarize what Donald said. He basically said God is love. So if God is love, we have to mirror that. We have to do it exactly that way. We have to be kind to our brother. But if we fall short, we sin, or we do something we're not supposed to, God is going to chastise us. He's going to correct us. So there is love in correction, right? That wasn't exactly the words he used, but I think that's what he's trying to get to, that God is love, and that's how our actions needs to be shown. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
To die for our sins, for us. So the more we study, that's got to be a positive. And the experiences that we have with one another, but to really ever understand the depth of it, I don't know where I'll ever be able to wrap my mind around it to the extent that I need to.
I agree with you. It's tough. Clyde referenced 1 John Chapter 4, verses 12 through 16. We don't know that we can ever understand it to the depth that it's written unless we give our life or give our son, if it were, for that. There was life in these verses. And I don't have a fully understanding of it, but I do know that when it says in verse 12, if we love one another, God abides in us. God's love is going to be perfect toward us. And if we're striving for our love to be perfect toward our brothers and sisters, how much more love are we going to have? Because we know God's going to abide in us, right?
There's one thing for sure, we know love will make us have some kind of action.
Clyde said that we know for sure that love will cause us to have some kind of action. We give food to a brother. We give clothing to a sister. We help with housing of fellow Christians, right? So, as Donald referenced in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks of himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work. And then we will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. That is part of how we grow our actions, okay? So you got 1 John chapter 4. Now you got Galatians chapter 5, the fruit of the Spirit. Turn over a few pages to Colossians chapter 3. What does Colossians 3 have to do with 1 John 4? I know that there is other applications of Galatians that we talked about, the fruits of the Spirit. There's other applications of Colossians chapter 3. The first part of the chapter is talking about the old man. Verse 5, therefore put to death your members which are on earth. And then it goes through and it lists all the way to verse 11, the old man. Verse 12 picks up with the new man. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing one another, and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, you also must do. But above all these things, put on what? Put on charity. Put on agape. It's my understanding that this particular word is, again, the most powerful love that we can have, the agape. So if you're humble and you're meek and you're gentle and you're long-suffering and all of a sudden you just put on love, what have you done? Have we not said to that person that you're uncomfortable with, I love you? Yes, Tracy. Absolutely. Right. Tracy read. Absolutely. Yes, it sure is. So Tracy said, to finish the verse, where we were, bearing one another, forgiving one another, love, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. So that's the bond of the perfection. And then Carol said that it's a harmony. We can love in harmony because we have the same goal. And then Clyde said that in chapter 3 here, the whole chapter is talking about love. And it is. It's given us application of how to love more. So now we've got the fruit of the spirits, and we've got the old man versus the new man. It's a thinking process, right? But it's not thinking with their brains, it's thinking with their heart. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around God giving us His Son. And it's hard for me to say that He loved me so much that He turned His back when Jesus was on the cross. It was a dark day. But He also loved me enough that He raised Him from the dead and gave us that hope. Is it easy to love? Tracy said no. Beth said not always. I agree. Yes, sir.
In Matthew chapter 5, the Lord said, beginning verse 43, you have heard that it has been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemies. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For He maketh the sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love them which love you, what reward have you? Do not even the publicans the same? It should be easy for us to love our brothers, but you get into another. What about those that don't love you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you love them? How easy is it to love those that don't love you? As you get on further in 1 John 4, you both read, we love Him because He first loved us.
Mm-hmm.
But what about those that don't love us? We're even commanded to love them.
Absolutely.
And even God shows His love for those. He sends the rain on the just and the unjust and so forth. Here is, if we have difficulty loving our brothers, what are we going to be able to do with those that don't love us?
That's right.
We have to deal with them. And we're told we are to love them. So what reward do you have if you love those that love you?
I don't think the rewards at all. For those of you that are studying with us online or via the phone call, Ken stated Matthew chapter 5 to love your enemies. You know, it was commanded to love your enemies. And he said, if we can't love our brothers and sisters, how are we going to love those that don't love us? And then we love because God first loved us. 1 John chapter 4 at the end of that chapter. And we'll get there in just a bit. Yes, Donald. Donald asked the question, has God ever said to us that we phileo our enemies, or is it agape our enemies? It has to be agape, right? Because He is that agape. He is that charity. And He is, so if we're turning it around and we're trying to be just like Him, it has to be that unconditional love. It can't be the warm, fuzzy feeling, right? So how do we tell someone that we love someone that we're not very comfortable with? It's easy to say it to the people we like. But how do you say it to the person that's a member of the church that you may not like personality-wise? Galatians chapter 5, Colossians chapter 3 teaches us that. Let's turn over and read one more, and then we'll get back to 1 John. Let's turn over to 1 Corinthians 13. And again, the more I read this, and I get confused of which word is translated phileo or which one is translated agape. At the end, I know it's agape. So if we're learning how to put actions on what we do, love suffers long and is kind. Verse 4. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. Is not puffed up. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. Is not provoked. Thinks no evil. Is it agape love when we think evil? It's not. That's what this context is teaching us, right? So how do you not think evil? How do you not think about evil?
Looks like it's all got to get back to the Bible. You just got to get in the Bible. Hard sometimes.
Claude said you just got to get back in the Bible. And that's it.
In all our answers to our spiritual life.
Absolutely. Let's look at this verse. Thinks no evil, but does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. That's what Clyde said. We got to get back into the Bible, right? So if we're reteaching our actions to love more, what does verse 7 teach us? Bear all things, believe all things, hope all things, endure all things. The best I can summarize that for me is in 2 words. The best. If we look for the best in every situation with love in our heart, are we going to think evil? So if we do this and we have all this going on, have we not made the process with the actions? Everybody's pretty comfortable at this point. There's really not a Christian that's not comfortable that I can show that love to. Right? If we put it in the context of what we're trying to learn. Love never fails. I'm going to fail you. My actions, my thoughts are going to fail you. We as elders will fail you. Not intentionally. We would never do anything to intentionally bring harm. But we will let you down. Our deacons are going to let us down. Our Sunday school teachers, our members. And I say that with the utmost respect. But perfect agape will never let us down. Exactly. Claude said, as humans, we are all imperfect. Verse 13. And now abide faith, hope, love. These 3. But the greatest of these is love. So we have the greatest, it's love. We have the fruits of the Spirit, and we have the new man. How do we tell someone that we love them when we're not comfortable with them? By the way we treat them. Let's turn to 1 John again, and we'll try to think about this. Oh, absolutely. Clyde said, what about verse 20 of chapter 4? And we'll get there. With your permission, let me back up to 17. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as He is, so are we in this world. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. So He is, as we are in this world, we are perfected because of what? Are we going to heaven if we don't love? The answer is no. Verse 18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. What's your fear? When I was young, I feared death. I didn't want to die. As I got older, that fear subsided. Then I was fearful that I wasn't trying to do what God wanted me to do. There should be no fear if we're striving to love in that manner. Yes, sir.
In verse 17, it's nice and also this we can do this is the completion we can come right. And we shouldn't just live in fear all the time, but
That's right. Yes, sir. Bruce said that verse 17, what strikes him is we shouldn't be in fear all the time. And we can do this. It's encouraging. We can do this. And if we're doing what we can do, it's okay. There's not going to be a fear. Now let's look at verse 20. If we're putting actions on the words, if we put actions if we change it and we say our thought process needs to be changed. I'm not saying change the word. I'm not saying change the truth at all, because it is the same. But how do you become a better, you fill in the blank? We'll use basketball. How do I become a better free throw shooter? I've got to practice it. But before I practice it, I've got to change it if it's wrong. If it's wrong, I've got to change it. Because if I could practice wrong 1,000 hours, and it would still be wrong. So if we are thinking about love wrong, we have to change it. Yes, Doug? Absolutely. Doug said attitude goes into this. I can. Right? What's the children's book? The Train? I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. That's exactly the attitude that we got to have. So, verse 20. If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. And strong. Clyde said it's clear. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? How can I agape my brother or sister that I can see you tonight? We can give each other a hug. We can talk. We can see your. Can you see someone's thoughts? Right. Physically. That's exactly right. So if we are in a physical sight, how can we love God, agape God that we haven't seen? For this commandment we have from Him, that he who loves God must love his brother. No question. Turn with me back to James again, and we'll try to bring all this together. James chapter 1, verses 12 through 18 is a great commentary to 1 John chapter 4, verses 5 through 19. James chapter 1, verse 12. Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desire and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. If we don't have enough action to love, it's bringing death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and come down from the Father of lights, from whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of the truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creation. What does a kind of first fruits of his creation mean? What's the application? We can be a kind of the first fruits. we can have the best love, we can have the best humility, we can have the best meekness, we can be the longest suffering. We've got it. Because He's given us the perfect plan. And if we want the first fruits, what's the first fruits? The best. Go back to the Passover. Go back to the old law. What was required of every sacrifice? It was, Clyde said, the best, non-blemished. Is your love blemished? Just something for us to think about. So I've said all those words to say that we can love the people that we're not comfortable with as much as we can by our actions, not by our words. I tell my wife every day that I love her. Every day. It's a good practice, if you will. I'm not going to stop that. But I think she knows by some of the actions toward her instead of just the words that I say. Comments or questions? Yes.
Would it not be easier for us if we know the person better, continue to know the person, continue to understand them, because we are human?
Absolutely. Clyde said, doesn't it get easier the more we know them? The better we're with them, the more the communication. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
You know, we think about how we show our love and that kind of thing. Golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We're going to treat people the way we would want to be treated if we pay attention to that.
That's right.
I think that would show love.
Absolutely. Carol referenced the golden rule, do to those that you would want done to you. And if we believe that, it's going to be that process. One last comment. Verse 3 of chapter 5. For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments. And His commandments are not what? Burdensome. If we have a burden, we're not loving. We're not keeping His commandments. So agape is God. Agape is a commandment, and agape is for us today. Thank you very much.